5 jazz labels. There's a thread going around created by the Jazz Bums, a ragtag team of 3 gentlemen who make videos, live streams and videos under the moniker Jazz Bums. There's a link below to Jazz Bums channel, and their thread is show 5 jazz labels, 4 of their choosing, and then you choose the 5th. So I'm going to go, and I pulled 1 or 2 albums in some cases from these jazz albums, from these jazz labels. Not necessarily my favorite, but I love these anyway. So I'll give a little background. So first, let me show Prestige Records, and this is the great Mose Allison. Mose Allison is a very favorite of mine. This is his debut album, Mose Allison Sings, and I know there's some people that just don't get jazz vocals. This guy is like a hipster hepcat of vocalizing in the late 50s into the 60s, 70s, and beyond. I think I saw him 2 or 3 times in the 70s. He's just got this hip sort of like partridge farm. In fact, Pete Townsend's a very fan of his, Young Man Blues, and has covered some Mose Allison versions of some standard blues songs as well. So Mose Allison Sings. Seventh Son, Eyesight to the Blind. Now, you've heard Eyesight to the Blind because that's the one song that Pete Townsend picked up. Not written by Mose Allison. Who wrote that song? He uses it in Tommy. That's the one song on the rock opera Tommy that he did not... Oh, it's, of course, it's a Sonny Boy Williamson song. And so Mose Allison mixes his great piano playing. It's very bluesy and bluesy soulful, but jazz artist, and of course, one of my favorites on Prestige Records. Prestige Records started in 1949 by Bob Weinstock, and it's one of 2 labels that was sold to Fantasy Records in 1971. There'll be another one here, Mose Allison Sings. Fantastic record. This is the mono version, I believe, but this is a great record. Pick it up. I think it's fairly inexpensive, but anything by Mose Allison. Did a series of albums on Atlantic Records as well. Great record. In 1953, Orrin Keepnews started Riverside Records, and an early signing was Bill Evans. In fact, it was he was turned on to Bill Evans over the phone when Riverside's a New York label. And another label that in 1971 was sold to Fantasy Records, and Orrin Keepnews came out and worked with Fantasy for a number of years. And what a great producer. And there's a whole series of CDs later, the Orrin Keepnews masters or remasters. But this is the first Bill Evans record. And of course, we all know Bill Evans because of Kind of Blue and that modal sound he did. But this is not a favorite amongst some Bill Evans aficionados, but I think this debut is a wonderful debut. So this album actually was recorded in 1956, and it's one of the great debuts also, like the Mose Allison. But Riverside Records, New Jazz Conceptions, produced by Orrin Keepnews. A great start to Bill Evans' career, and it's a must if you're into Bill Evans. This Riverside, great record. One of the great jazz labels of all time, and possibly the biggest jazz label ever, with the most, I think they have the largest catalog. In 1956, Norman Granz, who was the manager of Ella Fitzgerald, started his own label, and that was Verve Records. I'm showing 3 Ella records just because visually I think it works nice. But this is the thing that got me into Ella Fitzgerald. I was driving home one night, late night, through Golden Gate Park, and I heard on the radio the long versions of Mac the Knife and How High the Moon recorded in Berlin. And her scatting, her improvisation is nothing short of spectacular. If this doesn't get you into Ella Fitzgerald, nothing will. It's a great record, some standards. Lady and the Tramp. It's just the band is killer. Her vocalizing is killer. Her just, it's like this testimonial exuberance she has in her singing on this record. And the next morning when I opened up the record store I worked in, I looked in the jazz vocal section. Of course, we had a couple copies of this, so I grabbed one, and this is a must-have in any jazz collection. Another jazz vocalist. So I guess what I'm showing at least 2 out of 5 jazz vocalists in this one. You know, not always a lot of love, but so many great records on Verve, from Charlie Parker and Lester Young to Bill Evans, also Billie Holiday, the Jazz at the Philharmonic series that Norman Granz put on. Later, Norman Granz would start in the 70s, come back in the mid-70s, and start Pablo Records. But I want to show these two just because I'm enamored with the cover art by Bernard Buffet, French illustrator, painter. Look at these. How beautiful are these records, right? This is Ella Sings, George, and Ira Gershwin. She was one of the masters of the songbooks. Did a whole series of songbooks of Gershwin's, Lerner, Cole Porter, and just spectacular covers. Here's another one. This is a Gershwin songbook, and these are arranged and conducted by the great Nelson Riddle, who worked with, I mean, every great vocalist at the time, Sinatra and so many others. Him, along with Gordon Jenkins, worked on a lot of great stuff in the late 50s into the 60s, but just fantastic ways. I mean, they've issued box sets of these. I have a box set with literally loose prints of these covers that's in a box, but I wish they would do really great covers like this, gatefold jackets of this Verve series, because they're stunningly beautiful records. Ella Fitzgerald and Nelson Riddle. Verve Records, again, one of the great labels ever. The next label is Impulse. And of course, Impulse is, it was coined as the house that Train built. Coltrane was sort of this center figure, one of the early signings, and just made a series of amazing, groundbreaking albums, from beautiful ballads to spiritual. Obviously, Love Supreme is probably his most famous, but I wanted to go for a little more traditional here. And again, for people who are not into jazz, this might be his most accessible album, and it's been reissued, and this is Ballads. And this came out in 1963, recorded in 61 and 62. And it's just a wonderful record with his McCoy Tyner, Jimmy Garrison, and Elvin Jones. What this lineup made some amazing music. Photographs by the great Jim Marshall, and I like this too because I have a wonderful black and white print of Jim Marshall's photograph sitting in Van Gelder's studio of Coltrane on his bench holding a saxophone. That was from the collection of drummer Tony Williams, and I acquired it some years ago. But this is such a beautiful record, Ballads. So the next label is Blue Note, probably the most famous jazz label of all time, especially these days with all the great reissues of Tone Poets and the Classic. And they've done a great reissue campaign. Music Matters Jazz did an amazing all-analog campaign. And Blue Note started in 1939 by Alfred Lyons and Max Margolis. And it became this incredible label of hard bop into the 50s. And Reed Miles and Francis Wolff became a really important part of it. Reed Miles with these great artistic typeface covers, design covers. And Francis Wolff, who was a photographer, also came from Germany and took most of the pictures on the covers. And so the great Francis Wolff archive of photographs just really decorate all those amazing album covers of Blue Note. I want to show us three Horace Parham records. Those of you into the whole hip-hop scene in the 90s will sort of recognize this as Us Three, the trip-hop, hip-hop group took it over, and that's when people started sampling Blue Note. And Blue Note got a huge audience in the 90s because of sampling and mashups and things. But this is one of several trio albums Horace Parham did for Blue Note, and I love this series of records he did. He worked with Charles Mingus in the Jazz Workshop, and on Charles Mingus's Ahum record as well. And he had a disability in his left hand that made him do a different kind of piano playing, a chord progression that really kind of makes his sound very different than a lot of other contemporary piano players at the time. This is with George Tucker and Al Harwood. George Tucker on bass, and Al Harwood on drums, and it's really great because it's post bop, but it's melodic. There's some standards. Opens up with Us Three, an original, but there's standards like "Lady Is a Tramp." Everyone seemed to do that in the jazz and the pop realm in the 1950s and 60s. And Walkin'. This album actually came out in 1960, and one of my favorites. I mean, Blue Note is a label you can do a deep dive, and I mean, there's many more famous records than Horace Parlan, and more musicians that are more well known. But I just really, in the last, I'd say 5-6 years, really discovered more of Horace Parlan's record, and I think I have 5 or 6 of his records. Just really a wonderful piano player. Now, the next label is Savoy Records, started in 1942 by Herman Lubinsky, and he's considered probably the biggest, one of the biggest shysters in jazz. I know a lot of artists were taken advantage of by label artists, but Blue Note treated their artists well. They were paid well for rehearsals and things, and Lubinsky just really underpaid his artists. But I need to show Savoy Records mainly because of Charlie Parker, is my all-time favorite jazz record. And Savoy, again, did a lot of rhythm and blues, jazz, gospel music, and has obviously a great catalog. Can't deny that. Dizzy Gillespie, Errol Garner, a lot of the bebop things into bop. In the 60s, they got into some avant-garde out there jazz as well. The label was bought in the 70s by Arista Records, Clive Davis. But I'm going to show this amazing box set. This is available on compact disc as well, and this is the complete Savoy and Dial studio recordings. And again, my favorite, one of the originators of bebop jazz, and Charlie Parker. Just 2 years ago, I believe, we had the centennial 100th birthday of Charlie Parker, and his music to me is just the most searing and soaring and soulful, and obviously compared to those Verve recordings and those Blue Note recordings and Riverside and Prestige, it's not the same type of recordings. These were early. A lot of these recordings were recorded on 10 inches before the LP format was made, so things were pulled together later for LPs, mostly 10 inches at the time. And I could also, get into the Mercury and Clef stuff of Charlie Parker too, but, Charlie Parker crossed over some labels, and there's a lot of intermingling of these labels, but Savoy, Clef, these beautiful 10 inches looked when they originally came out. So I am crossing over with the Mercury and Savoy just because I want to show you Charlie Parker. Any chance I get to show off Charlie Parker with strings. Don't be afraid of those strings. Beautiful recordings. Charlie Parker. Anyway, link below to the Jazz Bums. Go support that ragtag team of video makers that are exploring all aspects of jazz and are kind of learning as they go along as well, and teaching us, and we're teaching them. And it's really fun to hang out with them. Sometimes Friday nights they do a live stream. So if you're into jazz, check into their live stream. Usually I think it's around 5 o'clock Pacific time. They're more on the East, West, and East Coast, I think, Midwest and East Coast. So I don't always join in, but it's fun. It's fun stuff. So jazz, 5 labels. Thanks for watching, and Mazzy loves you.